Hey everyone, glad you're here. Before we get into it, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And I want to know something else. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you completely trusted? Not just surprised. I mean the kind of blindsided where the ground disappears from under you. Tell me in the comments. No names, just your story. Now let me tell you mine. My son got married on a Saturday in October. I remember the light that morning, the way it came through the hotel curtains and landed on the sleeve of my suit jacket hanging on the closet door. Everything felt right. My wife was at the salon with the bridesmaids. My son was probably already nervous, pacing somewhere down the hall, and I was standing there in a hotel room with a cup of bad coffee thinking, we made it. After everything, we actually made it. His name is Caleb. He was 29. The woman he was marrying, Priya, was the kind of person who made you feel like the room got a little warmer when she walked in. I liked her from the first time I met her. More importantly, she made my son better, calmer, more focused, less reckless than he'd been in his 20s. You can't ask for more than that. I've been in commercial real estate for over 25 years. I built the business from nothing. Started as an agent fresh out of college, worked every weekend for a decade, took risks that probably should have buried me twice. By the time Caleb was in high school, we were comfortable. Not wealthy in a way that changes who you are, but comfortable in a way that lets you breathe. My wife Elise had her own career. She ran a small event planning business. Weddings, corporate dinners, that kind of thing. She was good at it, detail-oriented, unflappable under pressure, always the person in the room who knew exactly what needed to happen next. We've been married 31 years. I want to say that again, because I think it matters. 31 years. Not perfect years. No one has those. We went through the lean early stretch, the years when I was barely home, a miscarriage before Caleb that neither of us talked about for a long time, a period in our mid-40s when we were more like roommates than husband and wife. But we came back from all of it. Or at least I thought we did. The wedding was at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside the city. Elise had helped coordinate parts of it, not officially, just because she couldn't stop herself. She and Priya's mother had become close over the past year, trading ideas, debating centerpiece options I was completely unqualified to have opinions about. The whole thing had become as much hers as it was the kids'. The ceremony was outside, late afternoon. The kind of golden October light that makes everything look like a memory even while it's happening. Caleb cried a little when he saw Priya come down the aisle. I didn't expect that. He's always been the stoic one, and it hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. I looked over at Elise beside me and she was smiling, dabbing at the corner of her eye with the back of her knuckle. I reached over and took her hand. She squeezed it back, but she was already looking past me at something across the aisle. I told myself she was just taking it all in. The reception moved inside as the sun went down. Open bar, a band that was better than I expected, a seating arrangement that somehow managed to keep my brother and my former business partner on opposite ends of the room, which I appreciated. I made my toast. I'd rewritten it 4 times and I still stumbled over the 3rd sentence, but Caleb laughed, which was all I wanted. It was during the dancing that I noticed it the first time. Elise had stepped away from the table to talk to one of the vendors, a lighting guy she apparently knew from another event. I wasn't paying close attention. I was talking to Priya's uncle about baseball, half watching the dance floor, doing what you do at receptions when you're the father of the groom and most of your obligations are done. When I glanced over at Elise, she was laughing. The vendor, tall, maybe late 40s, wearing all black like they do, had leaned in to say something and she had her hand on his forearm while she laughed. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. She pulled her hand back. They kept talking. I turned back to the baseball conversation, but something had shifted. Somewhere between my sternum and my stomach, something had moved out of place. I recognized the feeling from years ago, from a period in our marriage when I'd had suspicions I never fully chased down. I'd learned to recognize that particular kind of unease, the way it settles in without announcing itself. I watched her for the rest of the night without meaning to. Nothing happened, or nothing I could point to. She came back to the table. We danced once, slowly, to something I don't remember. She rested her head against my shoulder the way she always did. It felt normal. It felt like us. I went to bed telling myself I was being paranoid. What I didn't do, and I wish I had, was put my phone down before I fell asleep. Because at 12:47 in the morning, lying in the dark next to my sleeping wife, I picked it up out of habit. I have a bad habit of checking email before bed, checking it again in the middle of the night if I wake up. It's something Elise had been after me about for years. The phone lights up the room. It disrupts sleep. She was right. She was always right about things like that. I had an email from my business partner, Theo. Nothing urgent, a question about a lease renewal I'd deal with in the morning. I set the phone back on the nightstand, face up, and that's when her phone lit up on her side of the bed. She was asleep. Or I thought she was. The screen lit up with a notification. Not a text preview, just a small icon I didn't recognize. An app I'd never seen on her phone before. I know how this sounds. I know what kind of person it makes me. I am not someone who goes through his wife's phone. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to me. In 31 years, I had never once unlocked her phone without asking. I believed in privacy. I believed in trust. But that feeling from earlier, the one that had settled between my sternum and stomach, it hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten heavier during the night. She'd left the phone on top of her purse, right at the edge of the nightstand. She had a habit of not locking it immediately after she put it down. We were the same generation. We still sometimes forgot. It wasn't locked. The app was something called Signal. I knew what Signal was. I used it myself sometimes for work conversations I wanted to keep off the company server. It's an encrypted messaging app. It's the kind of thing you use when you don't want a record of the conversation. There were messages from a contact saved as M. I read them. I won't tell you the specific things I read. Some of them I can't fully reconstruct even now. My brain seems to have made a decision to blur the worst of it. But here's what I understood within about 2 minutes. This had been going on for at least 8 months. The man, M, whoever he was, had been at the vineyard that evening, the lighting vendor. The one she put her hand on his forearm and laughed. The most recent message, sent at 12:44 a.m., 3 minutes before her phone lit up, was from her. Tonight was harder than I thought it would be. I kept looking at him during the ceremony and thinking about everything. I need to see you tomorrow. Please. I put the phone back exactly where it had been. I lay down. I stared at the ceiling of that hotel room for 4 hours. Elise woke up at 7. I pretended to be asleep. I heard her get up, heard the bathroom door close, heard the shower run. I lay there with my eyes open in the dark and thought about my son, who had gotten married the day before, who was probably asleep right now in the honeymoon suite at the other end of this building, who had no idea his father was lying here with his entire life rearranging itself in real time. I thought about that sentence. I kept looking at him during the ceremony where I held her hand, the ceremony where I watched my son cry. I thought about all the Saturday mornings for 8 months when I thought she was with clients, all the evenings she'd been late at the office. I was trying to build a timeline in my head, and it kept slipping away because I didn't want it to be true, and the part of my brain that didn't want it to be true kept interrupting the part of my brain that already knew. By the time she came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed. She said, "You're up early." I said, "Couldn't sleep." She said, "Big day yesterday," and smiled the same smile I'd been watching for 31 years. I smiled back. I don't know how I did that. I still don't understand how that works. How you can know what you know and still perform normalcy like it's nothing. But I'd spent years in business negotiating deals where showing what I actually thought would have cost me everything. I knew how to hold a face. "I'm going to get breakfast with Theo," I said. "He texted last night." She nodded, already reaching for her phone. I watched her pick it up. I watched her face as she unlocked it. Something moved across it, just a flicker, and she set it back down and looked up at me with that same smile. "Tell him I said hi?" she said. I did not go to breakfast with Theo. I went to the hotel lobby, found a corner chair near the window, and called my attorney. His name is Walter. We'd worked together for years on property deals, and more than once I'd referred clients to his family law colleagues. He didn't do family law himself, but when I told him what I needed, he gave me a name without hesitating. "Are you sure?" he said. "I'm sure," I said. "Okay, her name is Steph. She's the best I know. Don't talk to your wife yet." I called Steph from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring, which surprised me. It was a Sunday morning. I apologized for the timing. She said, "Don't worry about it. Just tell her what was happening." I told her. She asked a few questions, calm and precise. The kind of questions that told me she'd heard this before, that she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. By the end of the call, I had an appointment for Tuesday morning and a list of documents to pull together. I sat in the parking lot of a vineyard where my son had gotten married 14 hours earlier, and I made those calls. Then I went back inside and found Elise at breakfast with Priya's mother and pretended everything was fine. That was the hardest thing I have ever done. I've closed deals under pressure, I've managed staff through a market collapse, I've sat in hospital waiting rooms not knowing if the news would be good or bad. None of it was as hard as sitting across a breakfast table from my wife of 31 years and passing her the butter. We drove home Sunday afternoon. She talked most of the way. About the wedding, about the flowers, about something funny that happened with the caterer. I made sounds of agreement at the right intervals. I was thinking about timelines. 8 months back took us to February. She had gone to a trade conference in Phoenix. I hadn't gone, I had a closing that week. She'd gone alone, said she'd connected with some vendors, came home energized in a way I'd chalked up to the change of scene. I wondered if that's when it started, or whether it had started before and Phoenix was just when it changed into something else. I didn't ask. I wasn't ready to ask. We got home Sunday evening. I unpacked. I called Caleb to tell him the wedding had been perfect and that I loved him. He sounded happy in a way I hadn't heard from him in years, loose and full, like a man who had just crossed a finish line he'd been running toward for a long time. I stayed on the phone longer than I needed to. I didn't want to hang up. After, I sat in my office with the door closed and pulled up the financial accounts. Steph had asked me to get a clear picture of what we had. Joint accounts, individual accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings. I'd been so absorbed in the business for so long that I'd let the personal finances slip into a shared responsibility. We both had access to everything. We both managed different pieces of it. What I found in the next 2 hours was not fraud. She hadn't cleaned anything out, hadn't hidden anything that I could see. But what I noticed was a pattern of small cash withdrawals, nothing alarming individually, consistent over the past several months. Restaurants I didn't recognize. A hotel charge I'd assumed was a client dinner. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. Tuesday morning I met with Steph. She was direct in the way that good attorneys are direct, no softening, no theater, just information. She walked me through the process, the likely timeline, the financial picture. She said the fact that I had a copy of those messages, even read without permission, would likely not help me legally, but the pattern of withdrawals and the hotel charges were a different matter. She also said something I've thought about since. The goal right now isn't revenge. The goal is clarity and protection. Those are the things you can actually control. I appreciated that. I wasn't thinking clearly yet. I needed someone to think clearly for me. I did not confront Elise that week. I know people think that's cold or calculated, but it wasn't. It was survival. Every time I thought about sitting across from her and saying the words out loud, I felt the floor start to go. And I knew that if I had that conversation before I was ready, before the documents were in order, before I had an apartment lined up, before I had any kind of structure around the collapse, I would either fall apart completely or say things I'd regret. So I waited. In the meantime, I told my brother. He's the only person I told in those 2 weeks, and only because he called me about something unrelated and I could hear in my own voice that something was wrong, and he pushed, and I told him. He didn't say a lot. He said, "What do you need?" I said, "I didn't know yet." He said, "I didn't know yet." He said, "Okay, I'm here whenever." That was enough. I found an apartment 12 days after the wedding. Month-to-month lease, furnished, 20 minutes from the office, nothing impressive. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just needed a place that was mine, that had nothing of ours in it. I told Steph I was almost ready. She asked if I wanted a process server or if I intended to tell Elise myself first. I said I'd tell her first. She said that was my choice to make. On a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the wedding, I came home, made a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. Elise was upstairs. I called up and asked her to come down when she had a minute. She came down in the same sweater she'd had on since that morning. She sat across from me with a glass of water and said, "What's going on?" I said, "I know about the man you've been seeing. I know his name. I know it started at least in February. I know he was at the wedding." She went completely still. I said, "I'm not going to have a long conversation about this right now. I've spoken to an attorney. The paperwork is in process. I think it's better if I stay somewhere else while we work through the logistics." Her face did something I hadn't seen it do in a very long time. The composure she always carried, the same composure I'd always admired, cracked, just once. And underneath it was something raw and frightened. She said, "David, please." I said, "I loved you for 31 years. Whatever you were looking for, I'm sorry I didn't know you needed it." I stood up. My attorney's name is Steph. Have your attorney contact her." I picked up the bag I'd already packed that morning and walked out. She didn't follow me. I drove to the apartment. I ordered a sandwich I didn't eat. I sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine yet, in a room that smelled like someone else's fabric softener, and I told myself I was going to be okay. I didn't believe it. But I said it anyway. My son found out a month later after I told him I needed to talk to him in person. I drove to his apartment, and he and Priya sat across from me on their new couch, surrounded by wedding gifts they hadn't unpacked yet, and I told them both what had happened. I told them the short version, not to protect Elise, but because some details don't need to travel any further than they already have. Caleb sat very still through the whole thing, the way he used to sit as a kid when he was trying not to cry. When I finished, he said, "Dad, I'm really sorry." Not about his mother, not taking sides, just for me. It was the right thing to say. Priya reached over and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything at all. I got through the next 6 months because of routines, morning runs, long hours at the office, Sunday dinners with my brother. I had a therapist I saw every 2 weeks. I'd never done that before, and I would recommend it without qualification to anyone in a similar situation. Not because she fixed anything, but because having somewhere to put the thoughts kept them from just circling. The divorce was finalized 8 months after the wedding. Elise kept the house. We split the investments. The business stayed mine. It had always been mine, and Steph made sure the agreement reflected that clearly. Elise got a fair portion of the marital assets. I got to keep what I'd built. Neither of us came away feeling like we'd won. I'm not sure winning was ever on the table. I heard through a mutual friend about 6 months after the divorce that things hadn't worked out with the man from the wedding. I don't know if that's true. I found I didn't feel what I expected to feel when I heard it. Not satisfaction. Not grief. Mostly just a kind of exhaustion, like a sound that's been playing in the background for so long that you only notice it when it finally stops. Caleb calls me every Sunday. That was Priya's idea, apparently. They decided they wanted to stay connected across both sides of the family, keep things from drifting the way they do when marriages fall apart and everyone starts choosing. I appreciate that more than I've told either of them. There's a photo from the wedding on my desk at the office. It's from the ceremony. Right before the vows, Caleb is looking at Priya the way you hope your kid looks at someone someday. I'm visible in the background, slightly out of focus, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. I keep it there because that moment was real. Everything that came after it was real too, but that moment, Caleb crying a little, the October light, the ground before it disappeared, that one I get to keep. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently. Not in a self-punishing way, I'm past that, but in the honest way you eventually get to when enough time has gone by and the wound isn't raw anymore. And what I keep coming back to is this. The choices people make don't happen in a vacuum. They grow slowly, out of smaller choices, smaller silences, smaller moments where one person says something true and the other one doesn't. Elise and I had plenty of those moments over 31 years. I'm not without my share of them. But here's what I also know. I spent 2 weeks after that wedding carrying what I knew without letting it collapse me. Not because I was cold, not because I didn't love her. I did. And part of me probably always will in the complicated way you love someone who is woven into most of your adult life. I held it together because I understood that falling apart in the wrong moment would cost me everything I'd built. And more importantly, it would cost Caleb and Priya the chance to start their marriage without their parents' wreckage landing on top of it. That was a decision I made consciously. It required something. I want to be honest about that. It required more than I thought I had. What I learned from all of it is something I wish I'd known earlier. Clarity is not the same thing as certainty. When I sat in that hotel lobby calling Walter on a Sunday morning, I wasn't certain about anything. I didn't know how the divorce would go. I didn't know if I'd regret it. I didn't know if I'd regret it. I didn't know if I was making the right call or just the most immediate one. But I was clear. I was clear about what I'd read, clear about what it meant, clear about what I was and wasn't willing to accept. Clarity is something you can actually act on. Certainty is just something we tell ourselves we need before we're allowed to move. The other thing, and this one I keep coming back to, is that dignity is a choice you have to keep making. It doesn't just happen. When I walked out of that kitchen with my bag and Elise said my name and I didn't turn around, that wasn't strength in some movie heroic sense. It was just a decision, made in real time, to not become someone I didn't recognize. I'd seen men in my position do things that felt satisfying for about 48 hours, and then became the story everyone told about them. I didn't want to be that story. I wanted to be the guy who handled something terrible with enough steadiness that Caleb could still look at me the same way. I think he does. I hope so. There's a version of this that doesn't work out as cleanly. I know that. Some people don't have a Walter to call. Don't have a Steph to walk them through it. Don't have a brother who just says, "I'm here," without making it about himself. I got lucky in those ways, and I don't take that for granted. But the part that wasn't luck, the part about not falling apart at the breakfast table, about choosing to protect Caleb's first morning as a married man, about walking out with a bag instead of a grenade, that part was mine. Nobody gave me that. I just decided, that's what I want to leave you with. Not the details of the divorce, not the accounting of who got what. Just that. Whatever you're carrying right now, however the ground has shifted under you, you still get to decide what kind of person you're going to be inside it. That decision is always yours, and it turns out to be the one that matters most.